Welcome back to YMHA. I am Vincent. I am joined again tonight with Allie and Amy. Ladies, how you doing tonight?
Good.
Good to see you. So real quick, shout out Amy, you closed on your house. You're moved in. How's the new house treating you?
For the most part, we're still putting stuff together. So
Okay.
I'm still living out of boxes for the most part.
Still living out of boxes, okay.
There's oddities, but we're doing good and I'm really happy with it.
Well, hopefully that changes soon and you're no longer living out of a box much longer at least, right? That's the goal. So Allie, how are you? Good to see you again.
Hey guys.
So side note, Allie, you are just literally one day over a month, right, from your wedding.
Yeah.
How you feeling? How you feeling?
Super hyped.
Yeah.
Little,
You sound so excited.
I know. She sounds ecstatic about it.
Allie's is the queen of procrastination. So of course I saved like the most tedious tasks for the last 30 days. So I'm kind of like taking advantage of every waking moment I possibly have to finish.
I mean,
but super excited. We're super excited.
Good.
We kind of like finalized all the other big details. So now it kind of like feels real.
Good. So it's a quick approaching. We know that month is going to go by very quickly. Look, we're already 4 months through the year and your wedding will be here in no time. So good for you. We're happy for you. With that said, everybody, we have a special guest with us. She joins us tonight. She holds her master's in clinical mental health counseling and an undergrad degree in legal studies. She holds her LMHC, her licensed mental health counselor. Real quick, if I said that wrong, if the letters are wrong, please correct me. But joining us tonight is for some, from the side of a medical professional is Mandy. Mandy, how are you tonight? Thanks for joining us.
Welcome. I'm good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, absolutely. Thanks for coming on and joining us, taking some time out of your busy schedule. Let's kind of jump right into some things. Tell us a little bit about yourself that, you may want our viewers to know, and we'll get, for those out there, we will get your contact information up so people can reach out to you.
Okay, sure. Well, as you said, I'm a licensed mental health counselor for the state of Florida. It is apparently the path that the state of Florida says is required. I'm not real big into formal education as a whole. So it is really interesting personally to be routinely identified by education and licensing and so forth.
Okay.
I was in the legal field previously and was young and naive and really thought that I was going to help people. And then I figured out that people who get caught up in the legal system really just want to fight with each other. So I had to rethink that and figure out how I was going to actually help people that wanted it. So I ended up in mental health, which I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg. It's kind of always been my personality. I tend to be the person people come to, and so now I just have credentials to back it up. But the opinions haven't changed much. Now we have really big words that help elicit trust from other people.
Gotcha. Okay.
I love that.
Yeah, it's nice to hear something a little different and, to be very real with people. I think one of the things is, and Mandy, we had talked a little bit prior. One of the things you had mentioned, and you said it here, your goal was, like you said, you were legal before and you just found that they just kind of want to fight each other. But one of the things that you had mentioned was your ultimate goal is you just want to leave the world a little bit better than you found it, right? So what could you, if anything, what are you doing now as an LMHC versus what you were doing before you had that credential?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with, we can quote a million different studies, but I think the general consensus is that if people aren't ready to change, they don't. And so whether or not they are coming for help because they want to versus the judge said they had to is really going to determine outcome. So when I have somebody come to me and go, hey, I'm struggling, they're more apt to actually make the changes than somebody who was forced.
Okay.
So we see the outcome difference and we want there to be an internal motivation. But sometimes we have to start with external and hope that we can build the internal. But as a general rule, most people seek out the help that they're looking for.
Okay.
And I've
So-
been asked a million times, you know, people will say like, oh, how do you work with people who are mentally ill? Which that's a whole nother rant, but it makes me laugh because I always tell them, I'm like, you realize that like everyone you encounter all day probably has some criteria for mental illness. The only difference is the people I work with admit it and try to do something about it, as opposed to pretending that everything's great.
Right. We all put
I
up
love
a
that.
face, right? Right. I think, Amy, you and I talked about it once, right? We all talk about it, and Mandy hit it on the head because it's, Amy, we've talked about it, right? People put on this show. Social media is a great thing. Everything is perfect behind
The
filters.
highlight reel.
Right? That's all it is. It's a highlight reel. But the truth is those people that are pretending that everything's okay. The truth is we don't know what's going on in their lives, right? They could be having the worst day of their life. So I heard something, and Mandy, I want your opinion on this, and we'll jump into some things with that leading off of that. But I heard something where it says, hey, you know, it could always be worse. And to me, the truth is that when I hear that, it could be worse for somebody else, right? You know, they could have just lost a loved one. They could have just lost their job. There could be so many different things out there. I don't like that phrase. It could always be worse. From a clinician standpoint, from your point of view, what would your takeaway be about that statement? If any, do you agree with it? Do you not? What are your comments relating to that?
Sure. Well, I promise this is not a therapist bullshit gray area response, but it actually does depend. That statement makes sense when you have somebody who is hell-bent on being negative all the time,
Okay.
where you have to provide perspective and say, I understand this was hard and I don't want to invalidate that, especially as a clinician, but in the grand scheme of the world, is the fact that you stepped in a puddle in your favorite shoes really worth the meltdown you're having right now, right? So in that way, it is important to say, you know, well, some days food, clothing, and shelter is a privilege and you need to relax, right?
Right.
On the flip side, to your point, I tend to land more on your side with this, because the thing is, it is very invalidating to say something or like, it could always be worse, or, but you have a lot to be grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
It's what we consider toxic positivity.
Okay.
So for instance, if somebody says, well, it could always be worse. All right, well, there are children starving in Africa. That doesn't mean I didn't have a shitty day.
Right.
And so saying things like that just tells the person they don't have a right to be upset. And the toxic positivity that comes in is where it's always like, we're just going to think about all the good. One of my biggest, like you mentioned that particular saying, we see a lot of these good vibes only shirts and signs and hats and everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people I'm totally owning that I have a bias because the people I work with may be different, right? Because they're coming from a place of maybe not being well, even though I work with plenty of people that you would never know are going to see a therapist.
Right.
But I always tell them, like, all this good vibes only. I'm like, see, there's a whole other diagnosis for that. And it starts with being delusional, because
Right.
you can't have good vibes only. That's not life. That's not reality. So telling somebody it could be worse, yeah, it's about to be. When I punch you in the face, that's going to be worse than this conversation now, but I will be satisfied and it will be worse for you. So let's talk about the context of that comment. Because telling someone they have no right to be upset does absolutely nothing to actually make them feel better.
Okay, perfect. So then, and I'm glad we touched on it because it's something that I've heard, and it's myself. I've tried to get away from saying it even myself because, to your point, it could be worse. And yes, we don't know your situation. It's very different. So that being said, first question that we want to talk about as an LMHC, as a person, personally and professionally, right? What do you wish more people understood about mental health? You know, the common misconceptions that there may be. What would you want? What would your that aha moment, that takeaway be that you want people to know about when it comes to mental health?
Sure. I think that from both a misconception standpoint and probably one of the best things we can do for mental health is to stop making blanket statements. One of the worst things we can do is have black and white thinking.
Okay.
One of the many cognitive distortions. But the problem with black and white thinking is we think something's always bad no matter what. And that's how we end up with stigmas, right? An example I used during, say, the riots that were going on last summer. Lots of people, again, with all the sayings, and you'll find, I think you might have started with a loaded question by asking, things like, oh, it can always be worse. Just those kind of
Right.
sayings, I think, are taken out of context. And people are like, well, two wrongs don't make a right, and it's never okay to be violent, and this, that, and the other. And so they've completely missed the undertone of, but have we addressed why this person was upset? Not saying they went about it right or wrong, but at the same time, did we address that? And to those people, it's, well, violence never okay. Okay. You go home, you walk in, and someone is hurting your child. What do? The same people who said violence is never the answer, the first thing they say is, oh, I'd blow their head off. You don't hurt my kid. Okay.
Right.
Well, violence is okay when it's something you think is okay.
Okay.
And so that sounds like it's not related to mental health, but if we looked at everything that way and looked at it as, if you knew where the other person was coming from and you would stop assuming certain things are good and certain things are bad, they're not. Most things are not moral or immoral, they're amoral. It's how you use them, what the intent is, and what was behind it. So when we talk about mental illness, if we could stop making blanket statements, then you would find that there isn't necessarily a need for a stigma, and that it's no different than any other health condition. One of the conversations I just had this week with a client in a toxic relationship, and we were discussing gaslighting, stonewalling, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, no, I don't think he knows he does it. And, as a therapist, you have to be, calm, because it's not your girlfriend. You can't say, are you kidding? Do you not see what he just did?
Right.
You have to say, okay, I understand. She says, but then I watched the videos and it's very textbook. That's weird to me. It's like, okay, but if you were diagnosed with lupus and you went to a group, you wouldn't be surprised that everybody in the group have the same symptoms. That's all the diagnoses are. It's what's happening in that particular moment, and diagnoses are fluid. You might be more anxious at one time or another. You could be more depressed at one time or another. There are certain mental illnesses that go into remission. And if we start looking at behaviors and why they exist, as opposed to listening to the diagnosis and searching for criteria, we'd find that there's a lot less black and white to kind of assess about each other. Because I can give you, I won't waste your time with it, but a million examples of why the same action in two different situations, one might be right and one might be wrong.
Okay. So let me ask Amy, you have your NLP, correct?
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know what that is, correct me if I'm wrong, neuro-linguistic programming, correct? So for what you do, NLP, compared to what Mandy does, is an LMHC. Very different, we know that. So what would you say, if anything, and look, if you agree, you disagree, it is what it is. I think the big thing here with us is we all can have this open forum and be very honest and respectful and have a difference of opinions. Would you care to piggyback off of that or add anything to it from even your standpoint?
Sure. I mean, neuro-linguistic programming is a focus on the linguistics. So we're not trying to diagnose, we're not trying to do any of those things. We're very, very different. What we are trying to do is kind of flip thought processes by changing the language, right? And questioning more than anything, so that we can get people thinking in a different way for themselves in whatever fashion relative to what the situation is. So it depends on what exactly someone says as to how they're thinking, which will determine which road I'm kind of going to go with NLP.
Okay.
Somebody saying like, well, I can't do this, whatever. I'm going to say, well, when did you decide that? Just because I want to stop them in their thought process and I want to just redirect them real quick. And then I'm going to take them from there, into other places, just to get them thinking about, okay, why do I do this? And how can I do it differently? And let them form decisions and answers for themselves.
Okay.
I'm a trained technician. I'm not trying to put any reminder into their mouth as far as my ideas on what they should be doing. I'm going to let them decide in different ways. So it's you're almost just challenging people in a way to look at things from different angles and perspectives.
Okay. So I want to do something a little different. You know, Amy, Allie, you haven't seen this before. I'm going to throw up a poll on the screen. Let me know if you guys can see this, okay? I want you to take a look at this. And there's probably 5 or 6 questions here. Can you guys see that? All right, hang on. Ready? You should be able to see it there. Do you see it?
Yep.
I want you guys, if you would, there are 5 questions there. Take a second, answer those 5 questions for me. And I want to see, and this is going to help us maybe get a little bit better gauge for some people.
We're clicking.
And then let me know when you guys are done.
My answers are going to be
Shocker.
Oh, I'm done.
You did all 5 questions there?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then Mandy,
I
let me
didn't know I
when
was going to
you're-
have schoolwork today.
Of course you were.
And I don't know if I need to tell you it's submitted.
Everything's done? Amy, you're done?
no. I'm taking my time.
Amy would be the last one to complete this when we ask, so it's nothing out of the norm.
It's kind of what I do.
Yeah, so it's very simple. So while she's finishing that up, you know, I'll preempt this. Mandy, what I want to do is move forward from this. Well, that's user error. You done now? Is that a yes? All right, so let's end.
Love you,
So-
Vinny. I can't wait till you run back and edit this.
I don't know if I'm going to. I might just throw this up. So we had talked about addiction a while back. All 3 of you said, yes, it is. So now the next question, mental health. And this is where I kind of wanted to get everybody's different opinions, because everybody I've talked to I've heard anything from everything that I have there to none of it, which was kind of concerning, to be very honest with you.
The fuzzy bunny onesie.
So who's the onesie back there? We saw
That's Isaiah.
okay, so there is an adult male wearing a bunny onesie in your house.
I'm pretty sure I own
Let
that.
it happen.
Watch yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, whatever. Hey, you do you. So one of the things that I saw here, you know, we had talked about a lot of this, right? So suicidal thoughts or tendencies, stress, depression, so on and so forth. I've had people tell me that like things like binge eating disorder, body dysmorphia, they don't consider them mental health. They consider it physical health. I agree, but I also think that it stems mentally. That's me. So
Me coming from fitness too, I saw that list and I'm like, oh, right away, I already know what the debate here
Right.
is. But I'll let you finish and then I'm just going to come with what I'm going to say.
No, go ahead, say it.
I'm going to say everything comes from emotional states, a lot of it.
Okay.
And that's really like what we're breaking down and what we're talking about.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Correct. Yeah, and that's what, you know, I was looking for. So now we have a split here. Seek help from a licensed medical professional. So 2 of you said sometimes, 1 of you said always. So
No, I'm not the always.
you're not the always. You are. Okay. So let me be very clear. Let me clarify this a little bit. When I say seek licensed medical professional help, what I am saying is I don't want people thinking that they can go talk to the guy on the street thinking they're going to get professional medical help. I think that's the key, right?
Okay.
Is we're going to need some sort of help. I think support groups are big. You know, Gamblers Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, I think those are huge. They're support groups. I also believe that it should be somebody who's specifically trained to help people get to that point, right?
My perspective is that I think people should try a plethora of things. I'm just going to kind of be broad with it a little bit. I think they should try alternative practices and practitioners. I think they should try licensed medical professionals and all the other auxiliary kind of things too, if you want to go like naturopathic and that kind of stuff, you know, because I think it's always a custom concoction, a formula, so to speak, for each person. And what works for one is not going to work for another, you know? So like some people like to do yoga, some people like to do bodybuilding, whatever, you know what I'm saying? Like try different things because you're going to a lot of things that will work in complement with each other. I think neurolinguistic programming and like Maritza, who trained me, is a psychotherapist and an LMHC and fucking 10,000 other things as well. They work all very well together, you know? So there's a good complement in seeing your therapist for what you need to see your therapist for, seeing other practitioners, you know what I'm saying? Like try different things and find what works for you. And that's why I say you should always see somebody, you know, and try it. At least start with one thing and continue going in your journey of figuring out what the fuck is going to work for you, you know?
So let me ask you this, Mandy, you're the LMHC in our group tonight. What are your thoughts on that?
The reason I said sometimes, now that you've clarified that you pretty much mean anybody who's been trained, I would say yes, versus maybe somebody on the side of the road. Is probably ideal.
Right.
I got stellar advice from homeless people, just saying.
I didn't say he lived on the side of the street. I said he was located at the time. He might have been waiting for the walk signal. Easy. No, what I meant though is like, I agree with you, Vinny, because one of the things I hear all the time is like, well, I can go and vent to my best friend or this person or that person. You are absolutely right. If you are just venting, absolutely. When I call my sister or my best friend, the first thing that I say when they call me or my sister says when I call her is, do you just want to vent and you want me to tell you that they're an asshole, or do you want advice?
Right.
Because sometimes people just want to vent, right?
Sure.
But the difference that I generally clarify with people is, but if you're hoping to get something out of it and figure out what change you want to make, somebody who actually knows how to help you make that change over and above just venting might be a good idea. Because a lot of people, you know, they've never been in therapy or been in a session with Amy. They don't understand the difference between really what goes on. They think they're just talking about their problems. They don't realize when they leave my office, they've got homework, they've got check-in stuff, they have assigned reading, and they have all this other stuff that they're working on.
Good Lord. It's like going to college all over again.
Well, if you only see me once a week, and then you're going to exist the whole rest of the week doing the same shit you always did, the chance of getting a different result after talking to somebody for 45 minutes to an hour is slim to none. And it's appropriate and creepy for me to follow them around and make sure they're using what I taught them. So I've got to give them ways to practice it.
I think it's also illegal, but you know.
That would be super.
I mean, it's not like I'm going to be like in their bushes or anything, but I'm just saying. But I did think
you might.
When you started this whole thing though, is because you said, I think we could have a difference of opinion and this and that. And I thought it was interesting that you started with that, because what Amy does is not only incredibly useful, but it's used by therapists all the time. Mm-hmm. The only time people who do NLP work or life coaches come under fire is because some of the accrediting education teaches some stuff that can be a little bit scary. Like I have a friend who was becoming a coach, and he was telling me all about the trauma work he was getting ready to do with a client.
Like,
oh my God. Right. I'm like, the idea of somebody dealing with someone else's childhood trauma after an online course is terrifying to me.
Yes. I'm going to agree wholeheartedly. It's a network. You know, like I love to refer out to people. Like you have to network.
Right. But the idea of, the reason I said sometimes is like, I don't always think people need a therapist necessarily. Sometimes what people need is a life coach. I'm like, sure, I could coach you through that, but why would you pay me? You can go to a coach who's going to have even more ideas than I do. Because I'm going to ask you what path is going to work and why. They're just going to give you a path that works. So if you just want a solution, you would go to a coach, not me. So that was actually one of the times.
I think to piggyback off of that, though, it really does kind of matter what it is. You know, sometimes, especially with like depression and things like that, like it might not be to the point where in that moment you need to seek professional help. Like maybe you do need just like an activity to pull you out of a slump a little bit. And then it's if you're at that point where you do need to go to the next level. So I think it's more of like an understanding on where you're at with it and what you need for it, because sometimes Amy is my fix and sometimes going to my doctor is my fix. It kind of all depends on where I'm at. And then sometimes I need to just like pull out a canvas and paint and just kind of like do a little bit of like solo soul searching. So I think it just
Right.
kind of depends.
No, I agree. I think that's a big thing. So let's kind of quickly move on through this. So we all agree, right? Medication should not be the first resort to helping improve your mental health. I think that we all agree there, right? Obviously, but it's one of those that it's going to work. Different things work for different people, right? We just said that. And we all agree here. What works for one person may not work for another, and there's no one size fits all approach. So I think a lot, and it sounds redundant. One of the things that I was talking with people about though was it's mental health is a real thing, right? Mandy, you brought it up, and it's going to bring me into the next question we have for you. You talked about there's no reason, once we start talking about it, we realize that the stigma that's been placed around mental health is placed there mostly because people don't understand it, right? We want people to understand what's going on. So with that said, removing the stigma is obviously one of the things that we're trying to do, and we've seen, and a lot of doctors and clinicians I've talked to agree, right? We need to remove that stigma because people should talk. In your experiences, you've been doing this a while. What are some of the positives that have come from, if any, that you've seen from mental health?
What do you mean by mental health? Like,
so let's talk about somebody who you've treated who has depression, right? You've seen their ups, you've seen their downs, or at least what they're telling you, correct? What are some positives from somebody talking about their struggles with mental illness, with their mental health?
Mental health in general? You mean good, bad, or the topic overall?
So good, bad. So let's say overall, what would you say somebody talking about their personal struggle with you, right? Obviously, you're a doctor. You're a clinician. You cannot say names and give us specific examples. We understand that, but talking with your patients as you have that breakthrough moment in therapy, what do those breakthrough moments kind of look like for you, as far as what are the emotions that go through your mind, and you even see through your patients that are experiencing when they see that breakthrough of, I can revert, and I've been doing this, I now know how to better handle things, in any sense of the word, right? So what would you say, what good comes from, and again, there may not be any good that comes from mental illness in general, but in your experience as a clinician, what would you say has been when you experience that breakthrough moment, we'll say, where a patient just understands it and gets it, it clicks? What are the emotions that are running through your mind that you're seeing in your patients?
Well, I get very excited. My clients have seen me jump up and start clapping and run over and hug them and all kinds of things that probably would make plenty of my colleagues cringe. But I'm like, oh my God, it's been over 6 months. And I jump up and get all excited because I don't know what it is. I don't know if the planets have to align right. We can talk about the same topic every single week. And I can, like a broken record, say the same thing. And all of a sudden, 1 week, they're like, Mandy, that makes so much sense. I'm like, what was I doing what? But I was saying that, I swear. Some reason it clicks. And so the emotion is usually very excited.
Okay.
The coolest thing though is it's actually kind of what Amy was describing is, we definitely challenge people. It's not confrontational, but it definitely is challenging. The only difference between what Amy described and what I would say I do is if they say, I can't do that, she would say, when did you decide that? And I would say, okay, well, until we figure out how to make you stop thinking like that, you're absolutely right. And then we talk about how we have to change that thinking.
Okay.
As far as mental illness goes, there actually are positives to it. And it's something that some people really struggle to understand. And I think it comes from that stigma.
Okay.
So we have a twofold thing happening, right? First off, I love that mental health is now at the forefront of things. I grew up in one of those old school homes that if you weren't bleeding, you were fine. You're fine. I'll give you something to cry about, that whole deal, right? Like, nobody about anything, right? I mean, we had plenty of crazy relatives, and it was always, what do you mean? I'm like, that can't be normal, but you don't talk about it. I'm glad that is coming to the forefront. But I will say one of the issues that comes up when we educate on the whole without fully educating is I have noticed, and I think this is where we get the disparity of how to give the right recommendations, because a lot of times people who are nervous say they have anxiety. Your palms are sweaty, your heart's beating, you're about to get up in front of the class to present something, you're nervous, you don't have anxiety.
Mhm.
Or if you're sad, you're not necessarily depressed.
Okay.
And so the reason we have to differentiate those things is it can be harder to understand what to do about it. And so somebody who actually has mental illness, it actually can be really invalidating to them. And I know Allie at least has heard me joke about it. Like, if one more live, laugh, love sweatshirt wearing comes up and goes, have you tried yoga? I'm like, Karen, if they could have just done yoga,
I love this girl already.
you think that in all of the years of depression and contemplating playing in traffic, they didn't think they could just go to yoga class and be cured? Are you kidding me?
That's all I need.
Exactly. I'm like, nobody gave me a magic wand with my diploma. I don't think
Right.
that Karen over there necessarily knows that, there's a breathing exercise that is going to fix it, right? Will it help? Absolutely, but it's not a cure.
Right.
So when we're talking about mental illness, when you ask what the positives are, one of them is it does actually make people with mental illness more tolerant of others.
Okay.
And honestly, it's one of the, I don't know what everyone else calls it. I always call it Instagram psychology, where everything is solved in a 5-step infographic that everyone passes around. Mental health awareness, get rid of the stigma. And it's somewhere on there. I guarantee there will be breathing, and most likely one of the other ones is yoga. I'm like, if you've ever taken a PTSD patient and said, close your eyes now, the first thing you do is jump up, say fuck you, and leave your office. Like, no, closing your eyes and meditating is not going to be something that's going to work for them.
And I can attest to that, right? You don't tell somebody with PTSD, Amy, Allie, we both all know people with it. And I talk to them, and they all happen to be military vets. And I asked them, I said, what do you do if somebody looked at you, if you're having a bad anxiety attack, and they just say, close your eyes? Like 4th of July, for a lot of them, we know is bad, especially if they've been in war. And a good friend of mine said, I will punch you in your face. We can't just close our eyes. Like they said, that brings back it makes it even worse for us. So you're absolutely right. I 100% get it. It's hard.
It's one of those diagnoses that go along with the others that I hear a lot, especially when I'm in a rehab setting. The number of people that come in and tell me I have PTSD, and I'm like, when we're not in group, I've watched people walk up behind you and hug you, this, that, and the other. I'm like, there's no way you have PTSD because I didn't get a call on the walkie saying you just punched somebody. And so that is something that people throw out there, right? It's PTSD, depression, anxiety. Those are the top 3 I hear people self-diagnosing.
Right.
And it really does, from a mental health standpoint, it can be really invalidating, but I find that it makes my clients so much more understanding of other people.
Right.
And I know that sounds strange because on one hand, they're really frustrated, but at the same time, it makes them so much more tolerant than the average person.
Mm-hmm.
People ask me what happens when somebody comes in with very specific, and I won't go into it, political thoughts and values and so forth, especially before January.
Oh God.
They would say, what do you do with that? And I said, I have to be really honest. The kind of people that I treat, they mostly are just like, wow, what happened to so-and-so that they're like that? Because they understand it better than the average person.
Right.
When you work through the symptoms of mental illness, there actually is other benefits. Like when you work through trauma, you're not hyper vigilant anymore and super anxious, but they're the most observant people I've ever met. Because when you grow up, measuring how heavy the footsteps are of somebody coming home from work that is regularly abusive, you become very observant to things. And as long as you get rid of the hypervigilance, there's actually, for almost every diagnosis, there are skills that people learn, because if you don't learn, you don't survive. So people I end up seeing as adults, they've learned individual things from almost any of the diagnoses I've seen.
Okay. So let me ask you one final question. So you touched on this, and I'm glad you brought up, right, that you're glad that you're seeing more and more people bring mental health and its awareness and, trying to help break that stigma. to the forefront, right? Being talked about a lot more, especially recently. Over the past 12, 15 months, we've seen it happen. One of the reasons that I did this was because I saw during quarantine, people were just starting to kind of lose it, right? They didn't know how to handle what was going on mentally, physically, emotionally, whatever the case may be. And they needed an outlet, right? So one of the things that I did was I sat back and thought, well, how can we provide an outlet for people just to vent, right? A lot of times I've heard people just want to be heard. They want to feel they've been heard. And one of the things we always tell people is remember, right? I'm not a licensed medical professional. I'm not a trained practitioner. I am here to be that ear if you need somebody just to vent to, and I'm fine with that. So over the past 12, 15 months, we've had the pandemic, we've had the ensuing quarantine. For your profession, how has the pandemic, the quarantine, all of that past 12 to 15 months, how has it impacted not just mental health in people and in the patients you've worked with, but how has it impacted your profession as a whole?
Well, as far as the individuals, I've never seen so many people with no personal history of or family history of mental illness meeting criteria for diagnoses as I have since everyone got locked down. In the people that already had a mental health diagnosis, I don't have a single example for you where they did not get worse, where months worth of work, we backslid, we had regressions. If somebody had social anxiety, they're now borderline agoraphobic. That's what I mean by like levels. Like we're so much worse. We are a very social species, you know.
Right.
Back in the day, if you didn't learn how to get along with the tribe, they threw you out and you either starved or you froze to death. So those people that reproduced were the people who learned to get along in groups. Well, then they told us all not to get in groups and most of us lost our shit.
Right.
So we definitely have seen an increase in mental health. And I mean, even myself and my colleagues, like I work with a lot of colleagues that will come to me going, I don't know, how do we do this? Like, how do you treat for something that not only have you never personally experienced, because there's diagnoses that we treat that we don't have. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't necessarily want my oncologist to have cancer. I would like them to be around to treat me, right? So, like, there are diagnoses that we work with, but especially during the pandemic, we don't necessarily we weren't even taught. It's like all the stuff we used to tell people about making sure to be social and behavioral activation, which is a combination of things you enjoy and things that you need to do for your mental health and so forth. Can't tell them to go be social, can't tell them to meet up with your friends, can't tell them to do this, that, and the other. And so professionally, it's been a period of not just thinking outside the box, but just kind of blowing up the box and seeing what sticks until we have come up with so many different options. And some work for some people, some don't work for others. I'm in Florida, so my idea of weather is different than when I'm telling somebody in January.
Yeah.
I mean, I have clients in the UK, in India, all over the world. And so when they're snowed in, they're like, well, what do you do to get out? I'm like, it's 65 here.
Already.
I'm sorry, I feel like an asshole right now. I don't know what to tell you. But I think the biggest change in mental health has been the fact that they have now made it legal to do telehealth. That was not something that we could do in the past. And I think it's huge because the huge issue that we have is access to care. And on one hand, there's something to be said for being able to hand my client a tissue, or when they have that breakthrough, be able to hug them or, put a hand on their shoulder when they're crying. But there's so many people that couldn't get to the office that would, make that appointment and then either no show or cancel more often than not because it was too anxiety inducing to leave the house. Mm-hmm. And now people are getting real care no matter what the situation is. And I think it's been great. I mean, there's technical issues sometimes and things like that, but that's no different than your client texting you and saying, I'm stuck in traffic, I'll be there when I can, as opposed to, hold on, I've got to reboot the router and then I'll let you know when I have a connection. And it's really no more or less time consuming.
Right. So good. So, you know, what we're going to do is, obviously with your permission, we're going to get your contact information up because I think there are going to be people out there that this would be a good thing for them. We appreciate you coming on. So as a small thank you, and I don't know if you're going to see it. So we actually had shirts made for the company. So we're actually going to send you one of our company shirts, has our logo on the front, and then on the back, it actually has our entire company name spelled out. So we're going to get that sent out to you for joining us. So we thank you for everything you do. You know,
I'll
so
grab your information. I love to network. So if I have people that I can, you know, refer to, but vice versa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I'm all about all the love all the time.
it's not just that. Amy loves to talk to people because she's a social butterfly. Lockdown killed everybody. People like Amy, who is very sociable, kind of had to realize, like, oh crap, what do I do when I have to be locked up by myself for 12 plus hours a day?
Mandy and I lost our Wednesdays together.
Oh, did you?
Stop me on this planet ever till this body stops.
All right, calm down there, Big Red. Other than that, guys, are there any other thoughts or comments that either Allie, Amy, you want to add or piggyback off with Mandy tonight?
Allie, what do you got?
I don't know so much.
What's happening?
I know. I don't know. I am oddly quiet today. It's unintentional. No, it's honestly, I think that, like, I mean, like, I've said it before that, like, us chatting together has helped so much because I'm getting that venting outlet, and then I get that actual, like, fixing outlet with being introduced to Amy and working with Amy. So having today and it's like this session and like being able to like chat and talk and, you know, get with Amy or get with Mandy, because Mandy and I have kind of talked a lot in the past with being friends about things, but having this perspective on things, it really opens up a lot for me and my perspective, and, you know, things, especially with as far as, you know, the intolerance with other people and how I myself have been dealing with other people not being so accepting of the thought process of mental illness and things like that. So it really, having that clinical aspect tonight has really put a lot into perspective for me. So hopefully it kind of did for everybody else too. So I loved it.
I love technical information. So I'm glad, like, I'm just a nerd for learning. I'll never be done learning my entire life. I think that's the coolest thing out there. And I think it's helpful for people in the audience too, because of whatever background, whatever they may be struggling with. You know, some people may feel really stuck, you know, things like that. I think it just shows people that what's out there, you know, because if you go on, you do a Dr. Google search, I mean, God knows what you're going to fucking get and everything else.
Right.
You don't go through all this shit. You don't even know where to begin. Where do you begin? Yeah. Mental health issues. Where do you even go? What do we do? You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's really poignant to get to hear from amazing people and get technical information and get the, okay, so this is what it really breaks down to. And this is the difference between this and this. And so this is what this might apply more to, or that. This is why this person is going to be better for this situation, or that one may be better for this. I think it's just great to kind of help get people more information to help them make decisions, or get them thinking at least, or seeing what's out there, you know, so that it lessens a little bit of the white coat syndrome, and, you know, that they can go and talk to who they need to talk to about whatever it is that might work for them, or get the diagnoses maybe they've needed or didn't know, you know, either way. So I think it's great to have technical information. I think you've got a hella awesome background. I think you're dope as shit. And I'm fangirling over here.
So I'll say this, right? Amy definitely hit it on the head, right? Everybody Googles everything, right? With the power of the World Wide Web and Google, everybody's a professional in something, right? We're all lawyers, we're all doctors, we're all something. The truth is we're not, unless you went to school or you have some sort of background in it, right? Not necessarily, you know, to your point, Mandy, you didn't necessarily take the traditional route of going through and going through all the college courses. But you have college under your belt, you have a master's under your belt, you're doing things right. I think that anybody and everybody, right, we can all get online and put information out there. It's a matter of how do we decipher it. Technical information, to your point, Amy, is correct. You know, let's get that information out there and let's get the right information out there. So I'm going to leave you guys with something I want you to think about when we get back together another week or so. Ralph Waldo Emerson said once, the only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. I want you guys, little homework, not much. Think about that. Do you agree with that statement? Do you not agree with it?
100%.
Given the times we're in. So we're going to reconvene on that. Guys, if you have any questions, feel free, drop us an email, contact@ymha.info. It is up on all our social media. Links are below. Hit those up. Again, Mandy, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. And you ladies have a wonderful evening.